Hey everyone, today we're going to start chapter 11 and we're going to kind of hit on and introduce the cardiovascular system and give a brief description of the heart and some of the different parts of the heart. So let's go ahead and get started. So this is a picture within your textbook that I took off of your textbook because I think it does a great job at summarizing the most important things to know about the cardiovascular system. First, what is it? Well, the cardiovascular system delivers oxygen and nutrients to body tissues and takes away waste, such as carbon dioxide. And it does this through your blood. So it's a transportation system that takes good things to and bad things gets rid of. How? How is it able to do this? Well, the heart pumps blood throughout the body in blood vessels. So blood is that transport um, basically structure that they're using. So blood is important. The other way is vessels. So vessels is what carries it to the rest of the body, kind of like roads. So blood is the car, the blood vessels are the roads. Now, blood flow, it needs the heart to pump it because you have to have a machine. And then it is also pumped through changes in blood pressure. And that's why when you go to the doctor, they're always constantly taking that. Why? Why is it important to learn about the cardiovascular system? Well, if the cardiovascular system didn't perform properly, it wouldn't be able to perform functions. Waste would build up. The body wouldn't get enough oxygen and cells would begin to die. So cardiovascular system is very important for your body that works together with your other ones. So the cardiovascular system, it is a closed system, which means blood just isn't free floating throughout your body. They're contained within structures. They're contained within two structures. The first one is the heart. Second one is blood vessels. The function of the heart is to pump blood, while blood vessels circulate it to the rest of the body. Again, if I had to give one word for the function of the cardiovascular system, transportation. It transports oxygen, nutrients, cell waste, hormones to and from cells. So we can get oxygen to our cells and energy, and we can get rid of anything that we don't need. Let's do a brief preview of anatomy of the heart. First, generally, it's about the size of the human fist. It's not that big. So when you think of the heart, some people think of these big structures. It's really not. And it actually weighs less than a pound. The heart is located within your thoracic cavity, so this is your chest, and it's going to be between your lungs in the inferior, so inferior, remember, is below, the mediastinum. Media means middle, so it's just the middle of your chest or middle of your thoracic cavity. In terms of orientation, there are two key parts of the heart that we like to look at. The first one is called the apex. The apex is called this because it's pointed, but it's also misleading because you think of an apex at the top, but the apex for the heart is actually on the bottom. The apex is pointed towards your left hip, and it actually rests on your diaphragm. And if you don't remember, your diaphragm is a muscle between your thoracic cavity and your abdominal cavity, and your diaphragm actually helps with breathing. So this is about level with the fifth intercostal space, and I'll show you a picture to kind of illustrate this. The second key point that we use when we look at the heart is called the base. Again, these terms are a little bit misleading because the base is actually the posterior superior part, so it's on the top, and it likes to be towards the right shoulder and actually lies beneath the second rib. Now, the base is important, and we focus on the base because this is where a lot of our great vessels of our body emerge, like our aorta or our pulmonary trunk, these big, huge blood vessels. So here we have a location. Down here, this is your apex. It's more pointed. Here is your diaphragm and what it rests on. Up here, this area up here is your base, and you can see a lot of major blood vessels stem off of it. Here you have your superior vena cava, you have your aorta, and you have your pulmonary trunk. And we're going to go through each of those three major veins and arteries to veins and arteries, and tell you what they do here later on. So in terms of their location, if we were to split it down the middle, the midsternal line through the sternum, you're going to notice that a majority of your heart, actually, most of it lies on your right side. If you look at the base, it is right below your second rib, like we talked about. And if you look at down here, your apex, it's about to the fifth intercostal space. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Also, if you were to look at a top view, the posterior part of your body is back here. Here's your front where your sternum is. Your heart lies on the middle, flanked each side by a lung. In terms of also talking about anatomy, we need to talk about the coverings of the heart. So what protects the heart? The first one that we're going to talk about is called pericardium. So whenever you see the word cardi, that means heart. So cardiac muscle found in the heart. Pericardium, this is a double wall sac. There are two parts of this wall. The first one is fibrous pericardium, and this is pretty loose and superficial. When you guys go and dissect your pig, you're going to have to kind of peel it away. This actually helps anchor the heart within that cavity to different structures. It anchors it to your sternum and anchors it to your diaphragm, for example. The second part is your serous membrane, and this actually consists of two layers, and we've hit on a little bit in terms of early on, but I'm not sure if you quite remember it. So we're going to go through what a serous membrane is and the type of fluid that's found in it and why. So serous membrane, we already talked about, it's farther down or deeper than the fibrous pericardium. There are two layers. There's the parietal. This is the outside layer that lines the inner surface of the fibrous pericardium and attaches to large arteries. And the inside layer is called the visceral pericardium, and this is actually part of the heart wall, and it can go by two names, visceral or epicardium. So it's going to be the outside of the heart, but the inner layer of the covering of the heart. Between these two layers, there's something known as serous fluid. So I'm going to start that because I think it's important. You'll probably see it on your test. And it fills between these two layers, so when the heart beats, there's a relatively frictionless environment. You're not scraping on something every time. So let's go through these layers. Here is the pericardium. You have the fibrous pericardium on the outside. Notice that here it's attaching, and here it's attaching the heart to the pulmonary trunk, a major vessel here. So it attaches to different structures. The next layer that you have is your serous layer. And your serous layer, again, has two layers. The first one is the parietal, and this is going to be the outermost one. And then you have the visceral, which is the innermost one. And the visceral is also known as the epicardium. And then inside, there's a space full of serous fluid that helps the heart beat with very little friction going on. Now, that's the covering of the heart. If we're talking about muscles within the heart and the layers of the heart, there are three walls of the heart. The first one, and these words should sound familiar because we've seen them before, epicardium. So we take that epi, means outside layer. That's another word for your visceral pericardium. And remember, cardi means cardiovascular, your heart. Myocardium, this is new, the myo. The reason they call this myocardium is because this layer is actually made up of cardiac muscle. So myo is the muscle part, and cardium is the cardiac part, the heart part. So this is the middle layer. This is what actually causes the heart to contract and beat. And the reason it's able to beat is because it has this cardiac muscle in it. And the one key thing to remember about cardiac muscle is that it's linked by intercalated discs. So I'm going to ask you that on your test without a doubt. The third layer is the endocardium. I always think of enter, the inside. This is your inner layer, and it's actually going to line your heart chambers that we're going to talk about next. So if we're looking at this picture, here's your heart wall. Your epicardium is the same as your visceral, and it's the outside. Then you have your myocardium. It's very, very thick, full of a bunch of cardiac muscle. And then you have the endocardium, which is the inside, before you get to the empty heart chamber, the empty cavity here. So let's go ahead and talk about these chambers. The heart actually has 4 hollow chambers that are lined by this endocardium that we just talked about. Their names are atria and ventricle, and there's 4 because there is a left and right side. So atria are your superior chambers. So these are the ones on top. Sometimes we call them receiving chambers because these are the chambers that receive the blood from the body. And what happens is these chambers fill up with blood, and then it kind of flows down to the other chambers known as ventricles. And blood enters these chambers under low pressure. The second set of chambers are your ventricles. So there is a right and left ventricle. These are inferior, so they're on the bottom. We call these the discharging chambers because these are going to pump blood out of the heart to the rest of the body. And since it's pumping blood, it has to have enough muscle, and these are actually pretty thick. These are a lot thicker because they have more cardiac muscles there in order to pump that blood and get it to your head and get it to your feet, to the rest of your body. And then when your heart contracts, it squeezes and the blood propels out of the heart into your circulation. So here are your 4 major chambers. Right atrium, again, it's superior on top. And your left atrium, and it's superior on top. One thing to notice is I'm on the right side of this picture, but it says left. Because when you're looking at an image, it's always going to be a mirror image. So even though this is the right side of the picture, it's the left side of your heart. So when you label, don't get that mixed up. The 2 bottom, the discharging chambers, are your right ventricle down here and your left ventricle down here. So again, you have your right and left flipped because it's a mirror image. Over here, if we were to cut open it, notice down here, your left ventricle, or your ventricle in general, is very, very, very thick. And that's because this has to have so much muscle in order to pump it to the rest of your body. And this is the last thing we're going to talk about. How are these different chambers separated? Well, the heart is divided longitudinally, so up and down, by something called a septum. If it's called the interatrial septum, inter means inside, atria, the atrium, these just divide the 2 atria so they don't mix. Interventricular separates the ventricles. So there's a big, huge muscle or septum that separates it from the left and right. So over here, you can't really see the interatrial septum because it's covered over here by this big, huge vein. But you can see the interventricular septum. So I'm going to circle it right now. Again, here are your 2 ventricles, and you can see the big, huge separation here. So these 2 sides don't mix their blood. So that's the end of today's lesson. Let me know if you guys have any questions, and I hope you have a good day.